The arcade on Mulberry Street hummed with electronic life, its darkened interior punctuated by the glow of cathode ray screens and the mechanical symphony of pinball machines. Sarah pressed her face against the rain-streaked window, watching teenagers cluster around Pac-Man and Donkey Kong, their faces illuminated in blues and greens. October 1983 had brought an early chill to suburban Connecticut, and the warmth emanating from inside felt like an invitation she couldn't accept. At 16, she had perfected the art of observing from the periphery, cataloguing human behavior like the puzzles she solved in her worn copy of Games magazine. "You're going to fog up the glass standing there," a voice said behind her. Sarah turned to find a boy, maybe 18, with dark hair that fell just past his collar in that deliberately careless way that took effort to achieve. He wore a faded denim jacket over a Talking Heads t-shirt, and his smile suggested he knew something amusing that she didn't. "I'm Marcus," he said, extending his hand with a formality that seemed intentionally ironic. "And you're the girl who watches but never plays." Sarah's cheeks burned. She had thought herself invisible, a ghost haunting the edges of teenage social life. "I play," she said defensively, though her last quarter had been spent 3 weeks ago on a disastrous attempt at Gallagher. "I just prefer puzzles, real ones, not electronic distractions." Marcus's eyes lit up with genuine interest, a reaction she hadn't expected. "Puzzles," he repeated, as if tasting the word. "What if I told you I had the ultimate puzzle? Not crosswords or riddles, but something experiential. A game that uses the real world as its board and actual people as pieces." He pulled out a small notebook from his jacket pocket, its pages yellowed and covered in cramped handwriting. "But I should warn you, once you start playing, you can't simply walk away. The game doesn't pause." The rain intensified, drumming against the awning above them. Sarah thought about returning home to the suffocating silence of dinner with parents who communicated through carefully orchestrated movements rather than words. Her mother would be setting the table with mathematical precision, each fork exactly 1 inch from each knife. Her father would be in his study, door closed, emerging only when summoned by the dinner bell that hadn't been replaced since 1962. "What kind of game?" Sarah asked, surprising herself with the steadiness of her voice. She had read enough mystery novels to know that curiosity was often the first step toward trouble, but the alternative, another evening of pretending to do homework while actually rereading the same Agatha Christie novel, felt like drowning in slow motion. Marcus opened the notebook, revealing pages of rules written in different colored inks. Some crossed out and rewritten, others highlighted with fluorescent markers that had bled through the paper. "It's called The Architecture of Trust," he said. "Each player completes challenges designed to test their understanding of human nature. You earn points by predicting how people will react to specific situations, by uncovering hidden truths, by navigating social mazes that most people don't even know exist." He showed her a page titled Level 1, The Stranger's Secret. Below it, in neat handwriting, was the first challenge. Discover 3 true things about a person you've never spoken to before without asking them directly. Verify through independent sources. Time limit, 48 hours. Sarah studied the page, her mind already working through possibilities. The challenge appealed to her analytical nature, the way she could dissect a logic puzzle or decode a cryptogram. "And what do I win?" she asked, though she suspected the real question should have been what she stood to lose. "Understanding," Marcus said simply. "Most people sleepwalk through life, following scripts they didn't write. This game teaches you to see the strings, maybe even pull a few yourself." He closed the notebook and handed it to her. "Take it home. Read through the rules. If you're interested, meet me here Thursday at 4. If not," he shrugged, "keep the notebook as a souvenir of almost doing something interesting." Sarah took the notebook, its weight surprisingly substantial in her hands. She watched Marcus disappear into the arcade, the automatic doors swallowing him into the neon chaos beyond. The walk home took 20 minutes, during which she held the notebook inside her jacket, protecting it from the rain like a stolen treasure. The suburban streets of Fairfield were empty except for the occasional car splashing through puddles, their headlights creating brief theatres of illuminated rain. Her house stood at the end of Sycamore Lane, a two-story colonial that looked identical to every third house on the street. The porch light was on, a beacon of false warmth. Inside, she could see her mother's silhouette in the kitchen window, moving with rehearsed precision. Sarah slipped through the front door, managing to avoid the squeaky floorboard third from the left, and climbed the stairs to her room. The notebook felt hot against her ribs, as if it contained something radioactive, something that could fundamentally alter the careful equilibrium of her controlled existence. That night, while her parents performed their evening routines, her father watching the 11 o'clock news, her mother preparing tomorrow's coffee with scientific accuracy, Sarah read through Marcus's game by flashlight under her covers. The rules were complex, layered with contingencies and sub-clauses that reminded her of a legal document written by someone who understood psychology better than law. But what struck her most was the underlying philosophy, that human behavior was predictable if you knew which buttons to push, that trust was architecture that could be built or demolished with the right tools. She fell asleep with the notebook under her pillow, dreaming of neon mazes and strangers with secrets written on their faces in invisible ink. Thursday arrived, wrapped in grey clouds that threatened snow, despite the calendar insisting it was still autumn. Sarah had spent 2 days memorizing the notebook's contents, creating her own cipher to decode Marcus's more cryptic annotations. She had even completed the first challenge, discovering that Mrs. Patterson from 2 houses down was taking pottery classes in secret, that the mailman was studying for his real estate license, and that Jennifer Blake from her chemistry class was lying about her father being a pilot. He actually worked at the DMV, a fact Sarah verified through careful observation and a strategically overheard phone conversation. The arcade was less crowded on weekday afternoons, populated mainly by kids who had either finished school early or were skipping altogether. Sarah found Marcus at a corner table in the attached diner, nursing a coffee that looked like it had gone cold hours ago. He looked up as she approached, his expression unreadable. "You came," he said, gesturing for her to sit, "and judging by the way you're holding that notebook, you've done more than just read it." Sarah placed the notebook on the table between them, along with a single sheet of paper containing her findings from the first challenge. Marcus read through her notes, his eyebrows rising slightly. "Mrs. Patterson's pottery class was impressive. How did you figure that out?" "Clay under her fingernails on Tuesday and Thursday mornings, but not other days," Sarah explained. "Plus, I saw her loading something wrapped in newspaper into her car trunk. The shape was consistent with pottery. The community center 3 towns over offers morning classes. I called pretending to be interested in joining and asked if they had any students from Fairfield. The receptionist mentioned an older woman named Patricia who was quite talented." Marcus smiled, but it wasn't the condescending expression she had expected. It was something closer to recognition, as if he had identified a kindred spirit. "You're a natural observer," he said. "Most people would have just asked around, broken the rules within the first hour. But you understood the elegance of indirect discovery." He pulled out another notebook, this one black leather with a small lock. "Level 2, he announced, sliding it across to her. "But before you open it, I need to explain something. The game has other players, not many, I'm selective, but you're not alone in this. Sometimes you'll be competing against them, sometimes cooperating, but here's the crucial part. You won't know who they are unless you figure it out yourself." Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the diner's aggressive air conditioning. "How many others?" "Currently, 3, including you, but that number changes. People drop out or," he paused, choosing his words carefully, "graduate to different games." She opened the new notebook, finding a more complex challenge. The Mirror Maze. Make someone question a fundamental belief about themselves without them realizing you're the cause. Document the process. Bonus points if you can reverse it afterward. This is manipulation, Sarah said, though her tone was more observational than accusatory. Everything is manipulation, Marcus countered. Every conversation, every gesture, every choice of words. The only difference is most people don't realize they're doing it. This game just makes you conscious of the process. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. Your parents, for instance. The way they've structured your home life, the suffocating silence, the rigid routines, that's manipulation too, designed to maintain control without seeming controlling. Sarah wanted to protest, but the words died in her throat. He was right, of course. She had felt it for years without having the vocabulary to describe it. How do you know about my parents? Level 0, Marcus said with a slight smile. I observed you for 2 weeks before making contact. It's part of my screening process. I don't invite just anyone to play. The revelation should have felt invasive, but instead, Sarah found it oddly flattering. Someone had found her interesting enough to study. So, what makes someone qualified? Intelligence, obviously, but more importantly, a certain dissatisfaction with surface-level existence, people who sense there's something more but don't know how to access it. He gestured around the diner, where teenagers laughed over shared fries and couples held hands across Formica tables. Look at them. They're playing their own games, social hierarchies, mating rituals, power dynamics, but unconsciously. We're just choosing to be deliberate about it. Sarah spent the next hour listening to Marcus explain the finer points of Level 2, the scoring system, the penalties for being discovered. He spoke with the passion of someone who had created not just a game, but an entire philosophy. She found herself leaning in, asking questions, her initial skepticism evolving into genuine fascination. As the afternoon light faded, Marcus stood to leave. One more thing, he said, pulling on his jacket. There's a gathering tomorrow night. Nothing official, just some players sharing experiences. 9 o'clock, the abandoned Woolworths on Route 7. Park behind the loading dock. He paused at the door. Oh, and Sarah, that girl in your chemistry class, Jennifer, she's playing too. The revelation hit Sarah like cold water. She thought back to every interaction with Jennifer, searching for signs she had missed. The quiet girl who sat 2 rows ahead, who always seemed to be scribbling in a notebook of her own. Had Jennifer been observing her the same way she had been observing others? That evening, Sarah sat at dinner, watching her parents perform their choreographed meal. Her mother cut her chicken into precisely equal pieces. Her father read the newspaper, folding it into perfect quarters. They existed in the same space without truly inhabiting it together, like actors who had forgotten they were in a play. How was school? Her mother asked, the same question at the same point in every dinner. Fine, Sarah replied, the expected response. But then, experimenting, she added, I joined a study group. Her father looked up, a deviation from the script. That's good, he said, though his tone suggested he was processing this unexpected information. What subject? Psychology. Sarah lied smoothly, surprised by how easily it came. We're studying behavioral patterns. Her parents exchanged a glance, one of their wordless communications that had always excluded her. Just be careful not to let it interfere with your other subjects, her mother said finally. Sarah nodded, returning to her meal. Under the table, her hand touched the notebook in her lap, its leather cover warm like living skin. The abandoned Woolworths squatted beside Route 7 like a dead whale, its parking lot cracked and overtaken by weeds that pushed through asphalt with slow violence. Sarah parked her mother's Volvo behind the loading dock as instructed, her headlights briefly illuminating graffiti that declared "Reagan sucks" in dripping red paint. The October night was sharp, with the promise of early winter, and she pulled her father's old Columbia jacket tighter as she walked toward a side door marked with a small chalk X. Inside, the darkness was absolute for a moment, before her eyes adjusted to the dim light filtering through holes in the roof. The store's skeleton remained, empty shelves creating a maze of metal bones, checkout counters like abandoned altars to commerce. She heard voices coming from deeper within and followed them, her footsteps echoing despite her efforts at stealth. She found them in what had once been the store's back office, Marcus, Jennifer, and two others she didn't recognize. They sat in a circle on folding chairs that looked salvaged from a church basement, a battery-powered lantern creating a pool of yellow light that made their faces look like Renaissance paintings. "Sarah," Marcus said warmly, gesturing to an empty chair. "Everyone, our newest player." Jennifer looked different here, her usual mousy demeanor replaced by something sharper, more calculating. She nodded at Sarah with what might have been respect or evaluation. The two strangers were introduced as Derek and Amanda. Derek was college-aged, with the soft look of someone who'd never worked with his hands, while Amanda couldn't have been older than 14, her blonde hair pulled back in a severe ponytail that made her look like a miniature executive. "We were just discussing Derek's execution of the mirror maze," Marcus explained. He managed to convince his roommate that he was tone-deaf, despite being in the college choir. Derek leaned forward, his excitement palpable. "The key was gradual escalation. First, I started singing slightly off-key in the shower. Then I began asking him if songs on the radio sounded weird to me. Within a week, he was genuinely concerned about my hearing. By the end, he was convinced I'd been faking my musical ability all along to impress a girl." But the reversal," Amanda interjected, her voice carrying an authority that seemed incongruous with her age. "That's where you struggled." Derek's face reddened slightly. "I'm still working on that. Once someone believes something fundamental has been a lie, it's harder to restore the original truth than I expected." Sarah listened to them discuss their manipulations with the clinical detachment of scientists reviewing lab results. Part of her was repulsed, but a larger part was fascinated by the systematic approach to human behavior. These weren't random acts of cruelty, but experiments in social engineering. "What about you, Jennifer?" Marcus asked. "How's your project progressing?" Jennifer smiled, an expression Sarah had never seen on her face at school. "I've convinced Mr. Harrison that his wife is planning a surprise party for him. She isn't, of course, but now he's interpreting everything she does through that lens. Every phone call she takes privately, every unexplained errand, every whispered conversation with friends. He thinks it's all part of the surprise." "His birthday isn't for 3 months," Sarah said, unable to stop herself. "Exactly," Jennifer replied. "That's what makes it beautiful. He thinks she's planning something elaborate. He's been dropping hints about things he wants, being extra affectionate. Their marriage has actually improved because he's viewing her through this lens of thoughtfulness." "Until the birthday comes and goes," Sarah pointed out. Marcus intervened. "That's the elegant part. Jennifer will plant evidence of a cancelled party, a fake receipt for a returned deposit, a staged phone call. He'll overhear about a venue double booking. He'll think she tried but failed, and he'll love her more for the attempt." The group continued sharing their manipulations, each more intricate than the last. Amanda had convinced her teacher that another student was leaving her anonymous encouraging notes. Derek was slowly gaslighting his philosophy professor into questioning his own lectures. The casual cruelty of it all should have sent Sarah running, but instead she found herself taking mental notes. "Your turn," Marcus said eventually, all eyes turning to Sarah. "What have you chosen for your mirror maze?" Sarah hadn't realized she would be expected to share tonight. She thought of the plan forming in her mind, the target she had selected. "My mother," she said quietly. "I'm going to make her believe she's becoming spontaneous." The room fell silent. Even Marcus looked surprised. "Your mother," he repeated. "That's ambitious and risky." "She's lived by routines for 20 years, Sarah explained, warming to her topic. "Every day identical to the last, but I've started introducing tiny variations, moving her coffee cup half an inch to the left, adjusting the kitchen clock by 2 minutes, switching the order of magazines on the table, things small enough that she doesn't consciously notice, but large enough to create a sense of displacement." "And?" Amanda prompted, clearly intrigued. Yesterday, she made dinner 5 minutes later than usual. This morning, she used a different mug for her coffee. She didn't even realize she was doing it. She thinks she's choosing to be different, but really, I'm creating an environment where her routines feel slightly wrong, forcing her to adapt. Marcus was smiling now, that same recognition from the diner. You understand the game better than I expected, but be careful. Family members are complicated targets. The emotional entanglement can affect your objectivity. The meeting continued for another hour, with Marcus explaining advanced techniques and reviewing upcoming challenges. As they prepared to leave, he pulled Sarah aside. "There's something you should know," he said quietly. "The game has levels beyond what's in the notebooks. Some players get invited to additional experiences, more intense, more rewarding, but also more dangerous." "Dangerous how?" Sarah asked, though she suspected she already knew. "Emotionally, psychologically. The higher levels require you to risk parts of yourself, not just observe others." He studied her face in the lantern light. "Most players never get there. They reach their limits, realize they prefer the safety of unconscious living. But you might be different." As Sarah drove home through the Connecticut darkness, she thought about the gathering, about the casual way they discussed their manipulations, about the tremor of excitement she'd felt sharing her own project. The normal world, school, family dinners, teenage social dynamics, seemed suddenly flat, like a movie screen she could see through to the projector behind. At home, she found her mother in the kitchen, preparing tomorrow's lunch with mechanical precision. But there was something different. The sandwich was cut diagonally instead of straight across. Such a small thing, but Sarah knew it was the beginning of a larger unraveling. "You're home late," her mother said, not quite an accusation. "Study group ran long," Sarah replied, watching her mother's face for any sign of suspicion. But there was only the usual mild concern, the programmed maternal response. That night, Sarah lay in bed reading the black notebook Marcus had given her. The challenges grew progressively more complex, more invasive. Level 5 required you to destroy a friendship and then rebuild it stronger. Level 7 involved creating a false memory in someone that would become central to their identity. Level 10 was blank, except for a single line. Become someone else entirely. She fell asleep wondering what level Marcus had reached and what he had sacrificed to get there. 3 weeks into the game, Sarah could no longer distinguish between her real life and her player persona. The boundaries had blurred like watercolors in rain. She moved through Fairfield High's corridors with new eyes, seeing the invisible threads connecting people, the power dynamics playing out in every interaction. She had completed 7 challenges, her notebook filling with observations and evidence of her manipulations, but something was shifting, tilting toward a precipice she couldn't quite see. Her mother had become genuinely unpredictable. The small changes Sarah had introduced had cascaded into larger ones. Last night, her mother had suggested ordering pizza instead of cooking, an unprecedented break from 2 decades of home-cooked meals. Her father had stared at his wife as if she'd speaking in tongues. The careful equilibrium of their household was dissolving, and Sarah wasn't sure she could control what would replace it. She met Marcus at the arcade after school, finding him at the Gallagher machine, his movements precise and economical. His score was approaching the high score, numbers climbing with mechanical persistence. "You're troubled," he said without looking at her. "Having second thoughts?" "My mother smiled at breakfast," Sarah said. A real smile, not her practiced one. She seemed happy. "And that's a problem?" Marcus asked, though his tone suggested he understood perfectly. "It wasn't supposed to make her happy. It was supposed to just prove I could do it." Sarah watched his ship dodge and weave through pixelated enemies. "The game is changing things in ways I didn't predict." Marcus finally looked at her as his last ship exploded in a cascade of electronic noise. "That's the real lesson," he said. "Control is always an illusion. We can influence, manipulate, guide, but we can't truly control. People aren't puzzles with single solutions. They're complex systems that respond to stimuli in unexpected ways. He led her to their usual corner table in the diner. Jennifer was already there, but she looked different, hollow-eyed, her hands trembling slightly around her coffee cup. "Tell her," Marcus said gently. Jennifer's voice was barely above a whisper. Mr. Harrison confronted his wife about the party. She denied it, of course. He didn't believe her. They had a fight. She's staying with her sister. She looked up at Sarah with tears threatening to spill. "I tried to plant the evidence about the cancellation, but he'd already decided she was lying about everything. Now he thinks the whole marriage is built on deception." Sarah felt something cold settle in her stomach. "Can't you fix it?" "I tried," Jennifer said. "But once you break trust, really break it, the pieces don't fit back together the same way." Marcus leaned back in his chair, observing them both with an expression Sarah couldn't read. "This is level 8, he said finally. Understanding consequences. Every manipulation creates ripples. Sometimes those ripples become waves. Sometimes those waves destroy things we didn't mean to touch." "You knew this would happen," Sarah accused, anger flaring. "You let us hurt people." "I gave you tools," Marcus corrected. "What you built with them was your choice." "Besides," he added, his voice taking on an edge, "aren't you curious about what happens next? Your mother's transformation, Jennifer's teacher's marriage, all of it. These are just opening moves in a much larger game." "What larger game?" Sarah demanded. Marcus smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "The one where you realize that everyone is playing, whether they know it or not. Parents manipulate children into becoming acceptable versions of themselves. Teachers manipulate students into conforming to educational standards. Friends manipulate each other for social capital. The only difference between us and them is awareness." That evening, Sarah came home to find her parents in the living room together. Another anomaly. They were looking through photo albums, their heads close together in a way she hadn't seen in years. Her mother was laughing at something her father had said, a genuine sound that seemed to surprise all three of them. "Sarah," her mother called out, "come look at these. You were so small." Sarah approached cautiously, as if the scene might evaporate. The photos showed a younger family, one that smiled without calculation, that touched without agenda. Had they been playing a different game then, or had they not yet learned the rules? "We were thinking," her father said, his voice uncertain but determined, "maybe we should take a trip. Thanksgiving break. Somewhere warm. Together." Sarah felt the notebook burning in her backpack. The game insisted she document everything, analyze the behavioral changes, plan the next manipulation. But looking at her parents, really looking at them for the first time in years, she saw something that made her chest tight. They were trying. Her manipulations had broken their patterns, yes, but in breaking them, it had revealed something underneath. Two people who had forgotten how to be together, now fumbling toward each other like teenagers. She excused herself and went to her room, where she found a note slipped under her door. Marcus's handwriting. "Final gathering tomorrow. Midnight. Same place. Bring all notebooks. Time for graduation." Sarah spent the night wrestling with competing impulses. The game had given her power, understanding, a sense of control she'd never experienced, but it had also shown her the weight of that power, the responsibility that came with seeing the strings. She thought about Jennifer's tear-stained face, about Mr. Harrison's crumbling marriage, about her own parents downstairs, planning a vacation they hadn't taken in a decade. At midnight, she drove to the abandoned Woolworths. The others were already there. Jennifer, Derek, Amanda, and 3 new faces she didn't recognize. Marcus stood in the center, multiple notebooks spread on a table before him. "Tonight," he announced, "you choose. Continue to the advanced levels, or walk away with what you've learned." He gestured to the notebooks. "These contain levels 11 through 20. Techniques that don't just manipulate behavior, but fundamentally reshape identity, your own and others." But the price is accepting that you can never go back to unconscious living. You'll always see the game, always be playing, even when you don't want to. Derek stepped forward immediately, taking a notebook. Amanda followed. The three strangers each took one. Jennifer hesitated, her hand hovering over the table. "What if we don't want either option?" she asked. "What if we want to use what we've learned differently?" Marcus's expression hardened. "There is no different. There's conscious manipulation or unconscious manipulation. There's predator or prey. There's player or peace." Sarah found herself speaking before she'd made a conscious decision. "That's false dichotomy," she said, her voice stronger than she felt. "You taught us to see the strings, but you never considered that maybe the point isn't to pull them. Maybe it's to cut them." "Naive," Marcus said, but something flickered in his eyes. Uncertainty. Fear. Sarah pulled out her original notebook and the black leather one, holding them up. "I've documented everything. Every manipulation, every technique, every result. But also every moment of genuine human connection that happened despite the game, not because of it. My parents reconnecting, Jennifer actually caring about Mr. Harrison's pain, even you, Marcus, the way you look when you think you're really teaching us something valuable. Those aren't manipulations, they're real." She walked to the table and placed her notebooks down, but didn't take a new one. "I'm done playing. But I'm keeping what I learned, not to manipulate, but to recognize manipulation, to protect myself, and maybe help others protect themselves." Jennifer moved to stand beside her. "She's right. The game taught us to see, but we decide what to do with that sight." Marcus stared at them for a long moment. Then, surprisingly, he smiled. A real smile, possibly the first Sarah had seen from him. "Congratulations," he said softly. "You've reached the actual level 10, understanding that the greatest power is choosing not to use it." Sarah felt something shift in the room, like a spell breaking. "This was the real game," she said, understanding flooding through her, "teaching us to see manipulation so we could choose to reject it." Marcus neither confirmed nor denied. He simply began packing up the notebooks. "The game continues for those who choose it," he said, looking at Derek and Amanda. "For the rest of you, you've graduated to something harder, living authentically in a world full of manipulation." As Sarah drove home through the pre-dawn darkness, she felt lighter and heavier simultaneously. The world would never look simple again. She would always see the subtle power plays, the emotional manipulations, the unconscious games people played. But she also understood now that seeing them didn't obligate her to participate. At home, she found her parents asleep on the couch, the photo album still open between them. They had fallen asleep holding hands, a connection that had nothing to do with her manipulations, and everything to do with two people remembering who they used to be to each other. Sarah covered them with a blanket and went to her room. She took Marcus's notebooks and hid them in a box in her closet, not to use but to remember the autumn when she learned that everyone was playing a game, but that the only winning move might be to stop playing altogether. She looked out her window at the suburban street, identical houses full of people navigating their own invisible mazes. The sun was beginning to rise, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Tomorrow, today, really, she would return to school, to her routine, to her life, but she would return different, carrying the knowledge of the game like a vaccine against future manipulation. The victim hadn't known the rules because the rules were never meant to be fair. But in learning them, in mastering them, and ultimately in rejecting them, she had found something more valuable than victory, the power to choose her own game, with rules she wrote herself.